So what we find is that when you're doing jobs to be done work, you very often have to first explain what jobs to be done is in a much more structured way. And you might even have to quote unquote sell what jobs to be done is. This is often a precursor to a lot of the jobs to be done projects that we've seen. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and more on Jobs to be Done Untangled, the Jobs to be Done Toolkit's community call with me, Jim Callback, the author of the Jobs to be Done playbook and co-founder of the Jobs to be Done Toolkit.
Along with me, Elaine Matthias, the other co-founder of the Jobs to be Done Toolkit. I have a couple of quick announcements to run through today, and just I'll cover quickly the rules of engagement. So we have our upcoming Applying the Core Process mini course in May. This is our most popular workshop course. It's 6 hours with Jim and I, where we walk you through the entire Jobs to be Done course. We offer group discounts, so bring all of your coworkers. It's a lot of fun, a lot of activities, a lot of play, and we really have a blast teaching it. If in-person workshops aren't your thing, we also have an asynchronous video training tool, Foundations of Jobs to be Done. All of that can be found on our website at jtbdtoolkit.com. Jim and I are also available for team coaching, so you can reach out on that as well. If you just want somebody to take a look at the work you're doing, we can audit it. We can have give you some feedback, make sure you're on the right path, give you some clarity. We're happy to hop in for an hour or a package of hours, all of the above. We also have our April edition of JTBD Untangled scheduled for the last Tuesday of the month. They're always last Tuesday of the month. So hope you can join us every single time that we do this, because we have a lot of fun seeing the same faces, as you may have noticed when we got started.
Yeah. Well,
All
thanks
right.
for that. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to jump right into it. This is a community call. But we're first going to hear a couple of words from our guest today, Colin Duff. Colin and I got in contact about 2 years ago or so, I think, out on LinkedIn. We bumped into each other, and I've been following you ever since. And I have to say, Colin, you're doing some of the best thinking out there, trying to make jobs to be done accessible, practical, and trying to sell it as well. So welcome, Colin.
Yeah, delighted to be here. Thank you, Jim. And I see some faces I know, but for those that I don't, yeah, Colin Duff, you can detect the Scottish accent, based over in London. And I've been working in front-end innovation for about 20 years. So first half of my career was doing horrible waterfall, traditional insight, asking people what they wanted. I then migrated to more design thinking and thought I knew everything. And then I discovered jobs to be done about 6 years ago, and did a bad job for the first 2 or so years, and have started slowly been able to sell it. And I wanted to share some war stories. And when Jim asked, I thought, what is the talk I would love someone else to do? And this is it. So you're getting my version. As Jim says, I've been developing lots of materials. Today I'm seeing it as like a stand-up comedian pitching some new materials. Some will resonate, some will fall flat. And also, the topic I want to talk about today is selling jobs to be done, whether internally to colleagues, and particularly maybe you already have established it, but how do you move up the food chain to take it from what some people sometimes treat as a tactical tool, it's just half a dozen interviews, to something that's shaping the corporate strategy? Or if you're external, how do you sell it, and increasingly strategic and systematic ways? So I think it's such a great under-leveraged methodology that's still punching under its weight. So yeah, I'll
Yeah.
kick off.
I'll let you share your screen. Thanks for that, Colin. We're looking forward to what you have to say here.
Yeah, and it's going to be super discursive, so please pitch in at any time, and I'm going to be pausing us rather than doing big, long presentations. So, I think the number one thing in jobs to be done is, how do you get hired by people who don't think they need it, right? They're already plodding along. Design thinking is now ubiquitous. We have empathy. We understand customers, or so we think. There's this new thing or this, tool which we know. So how do you overcome that? And what I'm seeing, I thought, just to give you a bit of a state of the nation, is I work exclusively with enterprises, so people like HP, Marriott, BT, Prudential, and others, P&G, Unilever. And the advantage in being a consultant is you get access when you do projects to all of their previous research, so whether internally or from other agencies. And being big blue chips, they're using the top research and strat houses. Now, I can honestly say seen in less than one hand the amount of times there's jobs to be done in sight. There might be, mild embedded pieces or small elements, but from design thinking, which is close to ubiquitous, the jobs to be done, there isn't any definitive stats, but it's still really nascent. It's patchy. It's more often than not used quite tactically as a tool or a framework rather than as something that is shaping the strategic agenda. And the other thing I'll say is awareness has certainly risen substantively, right? People have heard the milkshake story, Jim's book. It's quite a popular term, just people use often imprecisely. But the awareness hasn't translated into adoption, or at least mainstream, and certainly not competence. I think there are exceptions, some startups, there's some top tier tech firms, but on, let's call it legacy enterprise, right? The 80% of companies that weren't in that vanguard, it's absolutely nowhere. And please, anyone who disagrees, this is my perspective, it's not grounded in anything empirical, please do pitch in. I thought I'd open with a question before I share my experiences to what do you think is the biggest barrier to jobs to be done going mainstream? So when you're trying to sell it internally or externally, where does it break down? And if you can just put in the chat in a single sentence or a word, and then I'll open it up for us to discuss. It'd be great to see where the stumbling blocks are.
There's some pretty good ones coming in, Colin.
Yeah.
Wolfram,
Um,
did you raise your hand?
Yeah, so I just misunderstood. I thought we shall comment, so I will also write in the chat. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, chat, or you can say it out loud if you'd like.
Yeah, so briefly, I think from my experiences, it's something. So they are all the colleagues are mostly experienced, the ones you talk with, like PMs or others. And then if you bring in a new topic they are not familiar with, it feels like, or they feel like, oh, I feel dumped because I don't know about it, and then they don't want to embrace this new framework, methodology, way of thinking, and then they reject it. The ones who understood it already. I have a new design lead here in the team, so it's super easy with him to discuss, even if it makes a lot of sense. They hesitate. That's my impression, because they feel I'm not confident with this new thing, and therefore I reject it, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's how I translate their rejection when I experience this kind of rejection. So
Yeah.
that's my point of view.
I picked up on the word you said, new, right? Because as a species, we're predisposed when something new just anthropologically feels threatening. And especially even for people that do design thinking regularly, there's a thing called the law of the hammer, right? And when every problem is approached through it and something new comes, I've even had people say to me, or you try to say this thing's better. Like, it's almost like there's a competitive element, which clearly there shouldn't be, but that can be interpreted. Let's hear from a couple others. Who else is?
I can go, just having resided externally and internally inside of organizations doing jobs to be done. I think there's often like a training that's done for innovation staff at a one point in time. And so if there's product people that are a part of that, they start to get it and they understand the technicalities of functional, emotional, social, the hierarchy, like at what level are we talking? And then there's rotations depending on the type of company, of the brand or product people, and the new people come in and they have no background. And so then you're trying to explain that technicality in the course of a project, and it's hard because you're really just trying to get the project going. And so I think there's jobs has a bit of technicality to it to do it right. And so I think that's a barrier I've noticed when there's rotations a lot through these innovation stakeholders.
Yeah. it's a really good one, actually. I say to clients when it's capability, so someone like, HP, for example, ideally send me a team of 12 people from the same team rather than 12 people across your organization, because it's going to be so much better when you have a body of knowledge rather than disparate someone's trying to bring something new. Let's maybe hear one more and then I'll crack on.
Don't be shy, raise your hand.
Julie, I'd love to hear from you since you
Yeah.
were the last one.
Yeah, this is something I get really passionate about on the journey mapping front. So I feel like there's frameworks that we as researchers see as really powerful, potentially very powerful way to help companies become more customer centric. And we release really great results and we're super optimistic. And then, especially if we're consultants, then we leave and people don't really know how to use them. There's a change management aspect that has to come along with it. Like, how are we going to apply this new framework consistently throughout all parts of the org? And so as a result, they don't get used effectively, they get used inconsistently. And with personas, there's some great personas out there, there's some crap personas out there, and they kind of shed a negative light on the whole framework. I see the same with journey mapping. Like, we release these really great journey maps and people are like, let's go right back to working the way we used to work. And I feel like we as a practice need to do a better job connecting the dots. You've got this set of jobs to be done, and so here's what's next. And from a consultant perspective, it certainly seems like that's a very new way of working when you're hiring a person to do some research and the framework. It's like, it goes beyond that. So I worry that jobs to be done are going to get the same reputation that personas did. And I'm very passionate about not letting that happen. I'm not saying I think we can all help with that.
I think there's a lot of people who've had a bad experience. I had one big client and said, we tried it, it doesn't work. What they tried was the switch method by a 2-hour training session and to be self-sufficient, and then didn't get a good result. And, it just, drives you crazy. I'm going to press on just in the interest of time. I identified in my experience, there's 3 current barriers and 1 emerging, or buckets I've come up with. The first one, right, is limited exposure. So people either are completely ignorant of it, or maybe they've heard of it but are a bit skeptical. Is this just another tool? Is it just some consultancy speak for a different way to interview, right? There's all these fads going around. The second biggest one is the false confidence of, oh, we already do that. And you scratch the surface and, oh my God, they really don't. And I'll give you a tip. Don't tell somebody that, oh no, you don't, and I'm a lot smarter than you, because that's how I did it. It just gets people super defensive and they will never buy from you. So I have an alternative approach that I learned the painful way. And then a couple other ones. One is, I do understand the instinct, particularly of leaders and especially HR capability people. We pitched 3 years ago for a 3-year program to upskill 500 product managers. And the resistance we got to jobs to them was, we're overwhelmed, it's complicated, keep it simple, this is our new thing, we don't need to muddy the water. And at that stage, I didn't have the visual vocabulary I could answer in the moment, but I didn't have the slide where these things often get passed around and it needs to be, understood, or the messaging. And then the final one is probably AI optimism. I haven't experienced this yet on jobs to be done, but I have in other conventional research of, well, why do you need humans? And I'll just briefly touch on that one. But what I'm going to do is go through each of these primary 3. I'm going to, like a comedian with some new stand-up material, pitch it at you, and then you can give me feedback and your advice, and debate and discussion is great because this is new material and it might not resonate. So I'd be really interested. My overarching tip, though, just before we get into some specifics, right, is the worst thing you can do in jobs to be done for somebody who's ignorant or maybe only has a surface level understanding is to try to make it new rather than obvious, right? You have to simplify this, visualize it so that they kind of at least conceptually or philosophically and emotionally get it, and make it feel really intuitive and safe. No one wants to be, or very few people, we know the stats, 16% early adopter. So no one wants to feel like a guinea pig. This needs to be positioned as, it's tried and tested. like playing to that loss aversion of, oh wow, you're not doing this right. What a great opportunity, right? You can be a hero in your organization. And the really important one as well, and this is probably the one for me, my biggest selling tip. The worst thing you can do when you sell is monologue. If you're talking for more than 2 minutes, the stats show your chances of sale just diminishes, which is really hard. If I'm talking to somebody who's never heard of jobs to be done, how do I help them engage productively and get excited? And that's what I've been trying to do. And to do that, what you have to do is really simplify and really visualize. So I'll give you the material now that I've been using in the response. I want you to put yourself in this scenario. So late last year, marketing director of a big B2B telco company called me up and said, we're running a series of value proposition canvas workshops. They're not going well. We're getting mediocre output that's very obvious, and we want to try and drive breakthrough innovation. You're a good facilitator. Do you want to just come in and do some creative thinking and you can help them? I said, well, yeah, I'd love to, right? But people generally are inherently creative. Perhaps the problem is the input to the value proposition canvas. And I said, look, what I've seen a lot is people are using traditional insight. So they're doing the design thinking empathy, whereas they probably for innovation breakthrough should be using more jobs to be done insight. And she said, well, what is jobs to be done? Now, I had less than 5 minutes on the call and had to do this on the fly of what is it? I'm busy. I've not heard of it. So what I've been using is this visual where I say, look, most companies do tons of research, but they listen in the wrong way for innovation. And there's a great quote, the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. And what we're saying here is people are thinking through a product lens of what are the pains and gains and how can I build the best mousetrap possible. Now that's great for or optimize the customer experience, short-term, incremental, competitive parity. It's not great for breakthrough innovation. And just to bring that to life with the simplest example imaginable, and for anybody who runs training, I've ran this exercise the last time and it went down really well. I took in a smart kettle I bought off Amazon and I said to people with no context, generate some innovation ideas, as many as you can. You've got 5 minutes. And what did they all do, right? It was all wonderful new features, keep the kettle warm, purify the water, link to my smartphone. And I said, those are all good, but why did you go for them? And it's because, well, why did you buy a kettle? To boil water, right? It sounds really obvious, but it's wrong. You buy a kettle to make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And that really simple reframing is what's led to Nespresso to perfect the art of making a cup of coffee. And it's now worth almost double the entire kettle market. And when I'm selling this, I ask the client, and this is keep it really simple, are there instances where you're thinking through the kettle lens or the candle lens, or are there things in your context that are changing that maybe enable new opportunities? And with AI and everything, it gets people. No one has ever said no, this doesn't happen. People nod and say yeah, but how do you do it? And I'll do one more slide and then I'll open it up. You really have to explain, because although we as job to be done practitioners may describe it as a lens and something that can transform a business holistically, my experience of saying that to people in enterprises, if I'm new to it, it sounds fanciful and it's scary. You're going to come in and completely resegment, you're going to customer service. Whoa, no way. So bringing it back to its, I guess, primary function, it's a research technique, and really just try to explain simply to say, you have tons of brilliant research that can help you explain what people are trying to do. So who they are, demographics, the firmographics, their preferences, their pain points, the customer journey map. And that is fantastic for continuous improvement and incremental innovation. Jobs to be done is a different technique that helps you look at the root cause of what people are trying to achieve, the different contexts, and really to get from often quite vague and generalistic insights to really granular insights that are super actionable and open up these new innovation opportunities. So on this side, I very often hear people saying, "Oh, our customers want value for money and convenience and personalization." On this side, you're going to have dozens of precise targets for value creation. And in an initial conversation, right, often you're just really trying to get the person intrigued and to say, look, are your insights, are they giving you what you need? Or if I went to your competitor, would they probably have 90% plus of the same insight, right? And to be honest, I've done this before at companies that compete in the same category. And if you change the logo, it is the exact same. So that's how I've been opening the conversation as little as 5 or 10 minutes. Often, if it's a cold origination or an intro call, you're only getting half an hour. And once the pleasantries are done, you might only have 10 or 15 minutes to explain jobs to be done. So keeping it really simple and try to get them intrigued. The one thing I do add as well is that for people to understand, although the technique interviewing may be the same, the questions we're asking are fundamentally different. So on the left-hand side, we'll typically be asking about, tell us about how you use the product, and we'll be looking at the task if we're doing the observational insight, contextual inquiry, and the technology. On the right-hand side, paradoxically and counterintuitively, we're looking at step by step, what are you trying to achieve, agnostic of the product, of the technology, of the channel, which is quite a weird thing to do. It sounds counterintuitive. So I like to always include just one other slide. People sometimes are suspicious. Is this something you've come up with, or is this some new book, right, that's just interviewing with a new name? And this is where I like to say, look, Jobs to be Done's actually been around for a while. It's been around over 20 years, became really popular in the last 10. It was developed at Harvard Business School and other places. It's used extensively by many of the world's Fortune 500 companies. And this is the point I always like to give at least one case study. Now, your case study ideally should be industry specific. Clients are, I can't tell you how unimaginable. If you give them chocolate, yeah, but it never work in financial services, right? Or you give them tech, yeah, but they don't have the same, I don't know, capital or operational changes. So I've got a bank of case studies. One of my critiques of Jobs to be Done is some of the case studies are quite boring and dry and hard to get your head around. And you're like, wait a minute, what is it? So I've been developing and I've got a new toolkit coming out. Like one of the ones I really like is there's one on Instagram when they launched the close friends feature. And I got this publicly available information and just visualized it. But what's really cool is they talk about launching this feature with traditional insight and it bombs. And then they said, well, hold on, we just asked a few different questions and it's quite nuanced. And we got adoption of now one of the biggest blockbuster features ever. And there's some great quotes. So really, you need to say, look, you're missing out. The world's big tech are all over this. Like, you need to, get with the program. We've got hundreds of success stories on this, and be prepared to rhyme them off, right? Because it's a credibility piece. So I'm going to pause there. That was my kind of intro. And sorry, I'm doing it a bit quickly today, and there's usually a bit more interactivity. But I'd love to get your reaction. Did that resonate? What worked, what didn't, what would you have done differently for a new buyer, so someone who doesn't know about Jobs to be Done?
I got an example that I want to butt in on, but I'm gonna let somebody else who maybe had something on the tip of their tongue speak first.
I would just mention I always start with who I'm speaking to and what does progress mean to them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're selling a methodology based upon understanding progress, like pitch it in that context.
Yeah.
Like what does progress mean to them,
Yeah.
right? And if they're a chief marketing officer or the head of customer success or the head of product, progress means different things to each of them.
Yeah.
So, Colin, this is almost a question to you because you mentioned that, it's possible someone has heard of the method before. But I think in the upfront pitch, because jobs has been around so long, I wonder, is there a proactive, like, and you may have tried it before, and proactively sort of anticipating that without saying, well, you did it wrong, or you didn't go in depth enough, or the people you had sort of left. Like, how do
Yeah.
you, because it has been around a long time. So people
Yeah.
have heard milkshake lots of times, things like that. So
And just on the milkshake one, like if I've got a long period, I love the story, right? But if you've got a short period, and particularly in let's call them more serious industries, I've noticed that doesn't always resonate because it sounds a bit potentially juvenile, like, oh, we're in banking and you're talking about milkshakes. So that's not my go-to. Let me partially answer your question because it's a bit contextual. If I just show you one other slide I was going to cover later. Um, so when people say, we already do it, we tried it, it didn't work, that kind of stuff. One of the things I'll say to them is, all right, if I can show a slide, give me 60 seconds. Which of the approaches did you use? There's two frameworks, and I do recommend showing them a visual because if you don't, you expose their ignorance, and most of them don't know there's two approaches, and that immediately puts somebody defensive because you've made me feel foolish. So I explain them and say, there's the Clayton Christensen one that's more common, and this is how we understand why people switch or stay with solutions, and it's good for, I'm not going now, but for all the reasons most people in this call know. And then there's this other outcome-driven innovation one over here. Which are you using? And often then they'll say, more often than not, if any, it's the switch one, right? And 80% of the times, it probably should be outcome-driven innovation. It's not always clean cut, but it's a product manager in a B2B situation looking for breakthrough innovation, and they're doing the left. And I'm like, all right, there's a big opportunity to get a lot more. This is a completely different method. So I think that's one thing I'm really keen on is just getting people to appreciate. I can't tell you how confusing this is to people that don't know. And I'm including here innovation PhDs who on LinkedIn have commented my stuff and said, what are you talking about? And I said, have you heard of ODI? No, never. Right. I read Clay Christensen. I'd say this is probably the biggest barrier we have. I wish they were called something else and not under the same heading because it just confuses the hell out of people.
Hey, thanks for that, Colin. I very often use the drill and hole quote from Theodore Levitt when I'm speaking verbally, because then I can tease apart, means and ends are different. But now that you said a lot of those examples are boring, I need a new example now. So you just killed my pitch deck. But we tried something. I want to throw this out there, and this will involve a couple of people on the call too. Is CK still on the call? And Elaine, and maybe even Uday, believe it or not. We just tried something recently, and we nicked it from design thinking. So in design thinking, when you're trying to explain design thinking, I'm thinking of Stanford D School. Right? When you're trying to explain design thinking, you very often want to talk about problem framing. And there's a very simple technique that we tried out for the first time. It's called design a vase. And what you do is you get people with a sticky note and you say, you give a little scenario, you work for a florist or something. Now design a new vase so we can increase our sales next year or something like that. And then they design a vase and you put them up on the wall and you see what comes out. It's mostly vases like we know them. And then you reframe it and say, now what if the problem is to enjoy flowers in your home, right? So that shift in language is a jobs to be done shift to enjoy flowers in your home. And then you end up with things like flowers around the door jamb or furniture with flowers in them, virtual flowers, pressed flowers. There's all kinds of other things that come out. And what you're able to say is if your requirement is, it goes back to your candle and light bulb example, right? If you're just designing candles all day long or designing vases all day long, right? You're going to get more vases, maybe some funky shapes, but it's still a vase as opposed to enjoying flowers in your home. I was able to then point back to this in the workshop as we went along because we had it up on the workshop wall and I was able to point back to it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Elaine, you and I never debriefed on that. I'm curious if CK can talk about that because he actually experienced this. And again, it was a way to get a group of people with a very, very diverse understanding of jobs to be done to just kind of level set things a little bit. So yeah, Uday, I nicked that one from design thinking. Any thoughts from those people I name checked?
Yeah, that's totally fine. In fact, I remember specifically that exercise when we did them as part of the D school. So I
Yeah,
remember helping out some of the cohorts, and you can see it was a little bit of a light bulb effect, right? Just
right,
people's eyes light up. It's like, oh,
right.
flower appreciation. Well, hold on, that's a whole other thing, versus another vase, right?
Cool. Elaine, what do you think? How did that go over when we use that? It was just a little so it's not as, I mean, we're just talking about one little trick here, Colin, right?
Yeah, I thought, it's as Uday said, it really loosens up people's thinking,
Mhm.
and it's a great way to get started for like workshop style activities. But I'm wondering, like, what is the equivalent when you're talking to like
Mhm.
senior leaders, or maybe you only have an hour? Can you get people to
Mhm.
participate in something like that, or do you have to use a different type of example
Mhm.
or activity?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. Thanks for that, Elaine. Because it's an activity, right? Where, as you mentioned, like I shut up. If when I put the drill and hole slide on, I'm talking the whole time. But it's I shut up, and they have a minute to think by themselves, and we do that twice. So it's a very different. It just that slight pick up a pen and do it yourself. It's a very different way of getting the point across. It's demonstrative, right?
I mean, the best one I can give you is the jobs map, which I'm not going to cover today, but I was pitching to a company that does online car sales. So they sell advertising to the car dealer, so B to B to C. And I was explaining jobs to be done, and they just didn't really get it. And they're saying, oh, whatever. But then I put up this big poster of a jobs map, and I said, from a dealer perspective,
Mm.
there's 40 jobs to sell in a car. Currently, you're serving one of them, well, one and a half. I've said your brief is to double your business. So why would you not? Instinctively, it feels like you should double the jobs because you're in quite a mature space. And their eyes lit up and they said, we know nothing about this. So, for example, acquire an inventory if you're a small car dealer. Well, that's not our job. And I said, well, why not? Right. Or some of the post, sales stuff around the customer management. Well, why can you not? It was a big conglomerate, right? And they're like, oh, wow. So just that as an asset, there's nothing better. And it's quite quick with AI to do.
Will has a point. Jump on in here, Will.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think what we found, and Jim, we went through this training with you guys over here at Citizens, but
Right.
I think what we've found, we're selling internally, we're not trying to introduce it, but I think we've discovered that we don't actually need to sell anyone on jobs to be done. We need to create a lot of aha moments in workshops. So they don't care about our terminology and our
Mhm.
methodology. They just need to be sparked throughout, over and over and over, right? You've got 2 days, 1 day, 1 hour, even whatever it is, you have to keep them constantly under like, oh, I really like this. Oh, I'm really getting it. And so like job mapping, to Colin's point, like they love that when you start to look at it through the customer lens and you're starting to break things down in like not a very in just like the job, the highest level, they really get that. But if I had to tell them like this is jobs to be done, but they don't care. And so we've started to honestly strip our terminology and our entire jargon library out, and we try to switch it to like what language do they speak?
Mhm.
What do we need to do? It's almost the same. Like we're doing our own jobs to be done. Like I need to spark innovation. I need to spark aha moments. I need to keep them engaged. That's our job. So I don't care if they know anything about jobs to be done. I just need them to keep moving forward. And that's what we've found, as we go through this. It's like, it's a great thing for us to understand. They don't give a damn. And so that's my take on it. This is awesome, but I think like for
Yeah.
facilitators it's awesome. But like when I have to get in that room, we found that they just don't want to learn a new methodology. They don't want to learn our terminology. So we have to flip it and just keep sparking them.
I think I 100% agree. Well, there's a big difference being external and internal. So if you're
Yeah.
internal and say, like, I can unlock innovation insight that's going to whatever, and you've got a good reputation.
Yep.
Externally, if I'm doing an RFP against four other agencies, uh,
Yes.
it helps to say we have a differentiated approach that you like, you need to productize. So I take your point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, Let me, if I can, I'm going to jump to something though that might be particularly relevant for the likes of Will, who can sell well, is the risk in jobs to be done is we will often, as a sales tip, and I would say this myself, start small, make it accessible, a few interviews, demonstrate value, and that's really good advice. But the danger is if it's an organization who's new and they're C-suite and disengaged. Also, it's a design sprint. I don't mean literally, but I mean of that tactical order of magnitude. It's 30 grand, it's 2 weeks, it's whatever. So what I've tried to do, because I'm trying to get the six-figure business from the clients, is I'm using this slide to try and say, look, what level do you need? And this is a simplified version. I say, like, there's broadly a couple of ways to do jobs to be done. Sorry. Yeah, so I say, look, you can do it in quite a tactical sprint style based way. For us, that would be at least a month because there's some recruitment and we do a kind of report and stuff. Internally, you could probably do it a bit quicker. And that's great when you've got a specific question, there's a core job, there's typically one job performer, and maybe you already have a baseline understanding of the space. And it typically will deliver. I mean, it can be breakthrough innovation, but it might be more continuous discovery. Or we can approach jobs to be done much more systematically. And this is where we'd map the entire job landscape. We'd look if it's ODI, all of the outcome statements. Typically, there'd be multiple job performer types or cross-category, and we'd be doing things like creating a jobs atlas. And this is how you would set long-term strategy. And this is why when you're asking for us, this would be 3 months plus, maybe 4 months, so maybe like 250K or dollars or pounds, doesn't really matter. When you're going to that, I remember the first time the client said, oh, it's a lot more than I was expecting for research. And I was saying, well, how much are you paying McKinsey and Bain and BCG for strategy? And they're saying, oh, well, about that. And I said, well, that's what this is, right? It's a strategy project. If it was usability testing, yeah, it'd be 30 grand or less. And you need to, rather than me try and sell, which is you just want more money, I say, well, have a look and see what the nature of the project you're describing, where does it fit? And very often it's, I want to double my business and know everything, and I've got 2 weeks and I've got 30 grand, right? And there's a misalignment. So it's just helpful sometimes to help them scale the project and say, look, we can work to any level of budget, time, and ambition, but we want to be realistic on the output. Speaking to a small number of users is great, but it's probably not going to change the direction of your company. Again, I'm just going to pause and see, does anyone have any thoughts or feedback on this?
That's great. I have something along the same lines. Oh, good. Jonathan?
Let's go Dom and then Jonathan. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, yeah, I was just going to say along the same lines, I like to use the design thinking model, because they're familiar with that too, especially in the UX world or in product development side, maybe not so much in the product marketing or other, broader strategic thinking. But in that first diamond, we're trying to figure out what are we solving for and getting people to focus on what problem are we solving? What are we solving for? Is what we're trying to answer, then get clarity around what jobs to be done. So brainstorming, doing qualitative on jobs to be done moves us along that diverging side of the diamond in that first part, and doing the quantitative helps us converge on, well, what's the highest priority to solve for? And how do we optimize what we would solve for?
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll as I playing off of that too, like I think like as soon as you brought up like the tactical versus the more systematic or systemic, just research the strategy. Research is triggering for some companies, like because it's a tactic, strategy is an outcome. So, and it just like thinking through that lens, if we talk to our clients or our prospects in the language of jobs to be done, and Dom, you just brought it up, it's like you think about like, what's the problem, what's the outcome? If we approach like that, because for years I was always looking at like if a client comes to me and they're like, I want you to design the next generation of this, it's like, okay, and it needs to be this, it's like, okay, that's a theory, now let's break that down. What are you trying to accomplish? What does success look like at the end of this engagement? And then reframe that in terms of, the language that we use in jobs to be done, because it becomes infectious. It's like they start to understand in their own context what we're talking about. So what's their job to be done? What's their desired outcomes? What are the things that are holding them back? And use those conversations as the segue. They don't even know they're learning the lingo if they can connect, emotionally and to that, because if they can see themselves in the progress that they want to make, then it's that dotted line back to, okay, that's exactly what we're talking about doing here. So let's not talk about all the steps in the process. Let's not talk about all of that. It's, what do you want to accomplish? What's your objectives? Why are we even talking right now? There's obviously something that's holding them back from success that, they're even considering working with someone like us who has more jobs to be done focused.
And just one observation I have for big clients is I'd say 50% of the briefs have no human need embedded. So as an example, someone says, we want to double the size of our business, right? Or we need a new cybersecurity proposition, but there isn't anything underneath it as though there's an unmet need. And what they're saying to you underneath is, I don't have a clue what to do, right? And you can then reframe it, and they'll happily take the reframe and say, oh, look how smart we are, right? But that's, I had somebody once say, my job's to cure homelessness. How can I use the jobs to be done? And you think, well, but you've got to help people convert it in so one other point I was going to cover, and then I'll throw open. What I find a lot of the times, even people who in theory should know jobs to be done versus design thinking are often quite confused but wouldn't admit it. So I spent a lot of time thinking, how do you very simply explain jobs to be done versus design thinking? And this point I've said before, I put a slide up over a year ago, and it's the only LinkedIn storm I had. It wasn't saying one was better, but the amount of people who said, you're talking rubbish, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 because it seems to be such a sensitive topic as you're dissing my thing. So this is V2, which is meant to be less political. It was never intended to be contentious, but I'd love to get the feedback. So what I tried to think is like, what is a really simple visual metaphor? And this is great if you were selling to like human resources on upskilling and they say, oh, it's all very complicated, keep it simple, one process. So I've started saying to people, look, think of it like tennis, right? There's a forehand in design thinking, the empathy phase, which is super useful. Jobs to be done is kind of, you might want to think of the backhand, right? There's no competition between them. No organization would say we only do the forehand. And actually, paradoxically, learning the backhand makes the forehand easier. You just kind of become a better player. It all gels together. It feels much more natural, much more rounded and effective. And just to unpack that a little bit more, design thinking, the classic process here, discover, define, ideate, prototype, test, it doesn't change fundamentally. The biggest change is on the discover phase, whereby, and in most instances, almost always, you will use a blend because you have usually existing traditional empathy-based insight, and then you might also do and/or jobs to be done insight to get this different perspective. And then there are downstream in these phases I put at the bottom, the jobs to be done lines will sharpen those and change them slightly. But the mindset and, well, the skill set is similar. The artifacts are slightly different, but we're absolutely not saying rip up what you have. It won't be applicable in every project. Some projects are very simple and they're short-term and tactical, and you just need empathy. And then one other slide I've used as well, sorry, I'm going through quite a lot today, is just because the value proposition canvas is so ubiquitous and actually, rightly or wrongly, is often the starting point for innovation. So they don't do the discovery insight, they just do the canvas and then make a kind of model of it to say, look, jobs to be done is the input to the canvas. So it takes you away from guesswork or often very vague and generalizable insights that lead to vanilla generic propositions. And it just like empowers this process. I've also got another slide talk about how it integrates with design sprints and other aspects. But I think it's our job to help people understand that this isn't something radically new that's going to disrupt your business in the sense if it's causing chaos and confusion. It integrates fairly simply. But yeah, I'd just be interested, does this slide make any sense? You're the first group that saw it. It might just be overwhelming and nonsense.
I'll chime in.
Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Thank you, Colin. Great stuff, and the conversation's been very edifying. So thank you. I think that how we position ourselves to these other methodologies is really important. And as you've alluded, making sure we maintain the dignity, protect the dignity of these other professionals in the innovation space, agile, lean startup, the CIOs, chief innovation officers, the market researchers, all these people are often unaware of just how powerful jobs to be done is. And it can be quite humiliating if this isn't done with tact. And I think it's very important to make sure they know that we are never going to make them feel stupid in front of their subordinates or their other board members or whatever it is, and that we depersonalize any kind of failure. And believe me, I've been the biggest offender of, I've lost a lot of business by being unthoughtful and thinking, hey, I know better. I have the best approach. The rationale, the reasons are with me. And of course, they say, so what? Get out of here. We're not working with somebody like you. So I've learned the hard way, but I think I just bring it up because I know you've mentioned it. I'm not speaking something new to you, but it's taken me a long time to really pay attention to every word I speak in these conversations to make sure there's no hint of, boy, you must be stupid to not get this. Because there are good reasons that these very bright people don't know this yet. And so that's one thing. But part of connecting with design thinking, I always say that jobs to be done precedes and complements these other downstream activities. So I try to get permission from the team to come in at the ideation. This is where there's a cross-functional team, but I have to get them on board to believe in what I'm doing as a jobs to be done practitioner, that jobs and outcomes are going to provide superior insights for that ideation, for evaluation and selection. And I think it's important that's been a place where I think it's important to hold the fort, if you will, and say this is a better way to do it. And then all the wonderful skills of design thinking, lean startup, and iteration can be put into place and will be strengthened by what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We like a couple of years ago, sorry, embarrassed was on mute. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Colin. A couple of years ago, I pitched for a piece of work, and the insight team that I was pitching to had a trove of research that wasn't very good. And it's taken me a long time to look through it, and rather than tell them, oh my God, this sucks, right? And thank God you're here, extracting the few useful bits and saying, you've probably mapped 60, 70% off the jobs, just not in that format, right? And oh, look at all this great stuff on job performer type from your personas, and we're building on it, and even putting slides so that they don't look bad in front of their boss to say, why did you do all that dross before? And now you're just like to bridge the gap. And I don't think the literature really does that well yet, is say, how do you adapt existing insight for jobs to be done? Like, it's a bit of a gap.
So Colin, quick one for you here. So you were talking about design sprints, which feels very somewhat well known, right? You talked about the value proposition canvas being well known. Design sprints seem to be relatively well known. And I know you would ideally love for a client to say systematic is where we want to start. But as you've thought about starting smaller and getting them into the process to see the magic of, like, let's say something very start and finish, like a design sprint, how have you experienced that? Has it shown up enough there for them to say, oh, I want more of this, and I got to where I was looking to, or it was like, no, they weren't prepared for the solution space yet, and so it was really hard to work in the design sprint framework?
I think the slimmest form I've done this in before is like a jobs to be done workshop that wasn't training, so it was application. And what we did for that, and it was recent, was a synthetic layer of AI insight, which I don't really have time to talk about today, and I know is contentious, combined with a jobs map, and it was just purely brainstorming based. Now, the reason we did that, it was the telco client I mentioned. They had 300 projects on their roster, and they said we have budget to do discovery, face-to-face discovery on roughly 30 to 40. Pick out some of the other medium potential. And originally the brief is run the value proposition canvas. And I said, well, look, rather than doing that, originally it was a 2 hour brief, give me a day and give us a little bit of bookends before to do the synthetic insight and see where we get to. And that just, I mean, the ideas were just like much more radical, much more interesting, and they started seeing the value. So that's probably the minimum way of doing it. And then I've created something I call a jobs to be done sprint, right? Which for me is 4 weeks because it involves recruiting. And it's how do you get people through a cycle, a loop, a learning loop quickly, which is an external 4 weeks is the fastest I can do it with any credibility unless it's workshop based. But I'd love to see how other people are doing it.
I've personally found that it's kind of where people are pushing us, at least as like outside consultants, is that everything, the expectation is faster and cheaper, with AI and so like even like the work that I would do, where it might be a 3 to 4 month project, and we always, if we're working with product teams, we frame the outcome as concepts. So that like not they don't have to be built out, but like we'll get through to here's some ideas visualized, and we do that by running it from here's jobs to be done. Jobs to be done is your research and define in the design thinking process or and define. But then ideation is, we might combine a couple desired outcomes that align and, move them a little bit further up in prioritization. And then in ideation, throw circumstances at it to break them out of, taking pivots, but coming down to it and getting some tangible output that they can act on afterwards, but then giving them the job map that we build out in the larger work and say, now it's not just a roadmap of ideas to explore and design, it's a roadmap of other things to explore in ideation. So we'll try to start as small as possible. So right now it's like, how many interviews can we get in a week and knock that out? Do you do the survey, or do you feel good with the results you have enough to move forward? And what are the things that emerge from that you want to do quant?
Yeah, we often struggle to sell quant up front because, it adds on. The clients we have want to do something robust. So if you say 150, they're like that's not a robust survey, even although we might say, but we don't need it. It's not price elasticity. So they almost don't want to buy it until they see the output. And in the first jobs to be done project I done, the senior client said, I'm so confident in the result, we don't need any survey. And I thought, I mean, it's not really the point, but we sold a design sprint, so I didn't argue the point. At one point I forgot to add is in the last project we did, one of the deliverables that was really small as an artifact was jobs-based personas. And they were actually much more impactful than we imagined in that they were using them, the client, elsewhere, like other teams, with no understanding of jobs to be done. And it was just framing it in terms of, okay, it's an archetype with an objective, with some outcomes, with what are the struggling moments. So that, even with zero context on the method, gave them a different lens. So that's another, yeah.
Getting a round of applause there for that one, Colin.
I've got one final slide. I mean, this will take 30 seconds. It's kind of a super quick view on AI, which I don't think is an original perspective, but just to show you where I'm on this. And yeah, so the way I'm seeing AI, right, is I'm an AI evangelist to the extreme is you can absolutely create the foundation through AI. And I'm talking here, so we did something recently and it was, I've never worked with architects. So I was able to do the job performer types, the context, the jobs maps, to a very high degree of robustness just with AI. And also actually surface a foundational level of insight. Now, I'm not recommending you don't do the human piece. That's crazy. but you can get, I would say, 60, 70, maybe even 80%. But the 20% you get through the human right is typically the pixie dust that gets you the breakthrough. So, I mean, to give you some really simple examples from my background that I don't think AI would have got to, we did a project, for example, in lawnmowers. Now, AI would clearly tell you the job is mow the lawn. It wouldn't tell you the job is to collect snow, right? Which it was in some countries. Or let's take generators, you know, those power generators. Again, it would give you loads of innovations around the like reliability, the like power generation, the safety, etc. It probably wouldn't tell you that the biggest pain point we discovered in interview one, walking through a muddy field, was the wheels got stuck, right? Somewhere they had a candy floss stand and it was raining and she's trying to push this. And the big breakthrough for Honda was motorized wheels. So it just can't give you certain kinds of insight. And I'd say also in the emotional stuff, it's nowhere near as good, but it can definitely do, in my view, 50% of the basics. But I'd again love to, I know we're limited time, hear perspectives on this.
On AI.
I would add that from an AI perspective, and this kind of relates to your qualitative quantitative discussion, is that the reality of synthetic research is that it's a hybrid.
Yeah.
And that when you do qualitative research through synthetic personas, you're actually defining archetypes. And so those archetypes describe populations of people. And so it's a unique hybrid in terms of, do you have enough trust and confidence in the qualitative research to inform business decisions? And I think synthetic research kind of bridges that gap a little bit, in that it in many ways is quantitative qualitative, which is an interesting dimension of that type of research. And it's not to say that you can't go to quantitative, but you can potentially narrow your scope of further investigation, right? Because oftentimes quantitative research is so broad,
yeah,
it's difficult to execute at the breadth of scale of analyzing the entire job map. And if you can kind of leverage synthetic research to at least hypothesize around those things, I think it kind of jumpstarts some of the trust and confidence in that, in making some of those, you know, next step decisions.
Just jumping in a little bit, like I use I'm with you, Colin. Like I've leaned very heavily into AI, just in augmenting whatever I can do. I typically start with a speculative job map that I don't run it through like personas or archetypes or anything like that. Just research the space and create a starting point and use that as a way to kind of refine the research plan.
Yeah.
And then I'm just looking for anything that speeds up the analysis process, so we know what we would need to pull out of the interview. So I have, in Claude, I have skills and projects within there that will analyze the transcript based off of like, here's job steps, here's circumstances, all of these things. So I leave that interview, by the time I get to the coffee shop after, I already have a brief on that has everything. And then I'm just editing based off of my memory of it. So anything that cuts the time out and accelerates the process, that's where if someone's going to pull something away from me, pull away from all that other stuff so I can spend more time talking to people.
Yeah, and Elaine and I introduced a whole new phase into our process called hypothesize. After you scope the focus job, hypothesize, because AI is right there, and it is so easy to create a hypothesis job map. I think the important thing, Jonathan, is make sure you call it a hypothesis or an assumption, right? But it does help you then do better interviews, and it helps you frame questions. Particularly if you're working in a field that you're unfamiliar with. I was doing something with cybersecurity. I forget what it was a while ago. I was like, I don't know anything about this. Guess what? AI can draw me a job map, and now I know a lot better about it. So AI is definitely changing how things work. But thanks for bringing that point in. We are 2 minutes over the hour here, and I see some folks dropping already. It was great to see all these faces here today, Elaine. And I want to thank everybody for coming. This will be recorded. We'll throw it up on YouTube. But I really want to thank Colin Duff for bringing this topic to. I know I learned a bunch of things, and I hope you all did as well too. And it was just a great conversation. I appreciate your style, Colin.
Yeah, pleasure, and hope we all keep in contact. Please add me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat to all of you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Elaine, any final words?
So keep an eye out for follow-up email. It'll have a link to Colin's LinkedIn. It'll have a link to the recording. It will have a discount code for our upcoming mini course, all kinds of resources. I'll probably include a link to the chat actually, because it was so good this time. There's a lot of nice things in there. There's a transcript. We have all the resources. So keep an eye
All
out for
the
that.
things. All right,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Jobs to be
Thank you,
done
Colin.
enthusiasts. Thanks, everybody. It's great seeing you all.